church has been a big part of my life. Prayer has been a big part of my life. And so that's just ingrained in my own being, I suppose. I had good family around me. I had my children. And I knew how to work. I knew how to, find a job.
Pierce Brosnan has lived a life that seemed straight out of a movie. Glamour, fame, and unforgettable roles. But beyond the red carpets and dazzling smiles lies a story of unimaginable heartbreak. After losing his first wife and daughter to the same cruel disease, Pierce now finds himself standing at another emotional crossroads. At 71, the beloved James Bond actor is quietly preparing for a future that looks painfully familiar. So, what exactly has he decided to do this time? And why is everyone so deeply concerned? Stick around as we uncover the full story. Pierce Brosnan's rise to stardom and the role that nearly slipped away. Before we explore the tragic news, let's revisit how Pierce Brosnan's transformative career turned a struggling actor into an international icon against all odds. Pierce Brosnan never expected that one audition in 1982 would set him on such a twisted and dramatic path that it could rival a spy thriller. At the time, he was merely another hard-working Irish actor, making modest waves in British theatre and television. He hadn't yet made a name for himself outside the UK, and no one could have guessed that this unknown 30-year-old would soon become the focus of a casting choice that would change TV history and nearly hand him the keys to one of cinema's most iconic roles. The audition was for a small part in a new American TV series called Remington Steele. Brosnan was originally considered for a forgettable role, a killing victim, destined to be seen once and never again. But the moment he entered the room, everything shifted. Casting directors saw something more. An effortless charm, the gleam of mystery in his eyes, and a quiet confidence that couldn't be taught. Rather than kill off his character in a single scene, the producers scrapped their initial vision and offered Brosnan the lead role. It was a bold move. The show's creators had envisioned a grizzled, middle-aged American trickster posing as a detective, not a smooth Irishman with a noticeable accent. Over 200 actors had auditioned, including many familiar names in the US. Yet Brosnan, a relative unknown, was selected to carry the series. The network had its doubts, but as soon as he stepped into the role, all concerns melted away. With his quick wit, magnetic presence, and air of mystery, Brosnan's Remington Steele didn't merely charm audiences, he redefined the character. When Remington Steele premiered on October 1, 1982, it became an overnight success. In its first year alone, it averaged more than 15 million viewers a week. NBC, thrilled by the ratings, rode the wave as the show rapidly climbed the ranks. At the height of its popularity, Remington Steele generated over $50 million a year in advertising and became a global phenomenon, airing in over 80 countries and earning close to $200 million worldwide. Brosnan's portrayal was so impactful that private detective license applications in America reportedly surged by over 30% during the show's run. But while his fictional life as a clever con man was skyrocketing, real-world whispers were already swirling. Was this man destined to be James Bond? The timing couldn't have been more perfect, or more complicated. By early 1983, Brosnan was being hailed as the most Bond-like actor since Sean Connery. Entertainment Weekly called him a natural successor. Even Anne Fleming, widow of Bond creator Ian Fleming, publicly supported him. It wasn't just the press or fans. The very people behind the Bond films were taking notice. But Brosnan's journey to the role was anything but smooth. Unknown to many, the first serious consideration for Brosnan as Bond began as far back as 1983, not 1986, as commonly believed. The connection came through a surprising twist. His wife at the time, actress Cassandra Harris, had a small role in For Your Eyes Only in 1981, which brought Brosnan to the attention of Bond producer Albert "Cubby" Broccoli. After seeing Brosnan on set, Broccoli reportedly remarked, "If he can act, he's my guy." But the opportunity came with a caveat. Roger Moore, then nearing the end of his Bond run, was uncertain about returning. Sensing a possible replacement, the studio met with Brosnan, only to panic and offer Moore a staggering $3.5 million to stay. Brosnan's chance quietly slipped into the background. Then came a cruel twist. In 1986, after 4 successful seasons, Remington Steele was officially cancelled. That should have freed Brosnan to take on the Bond mantle, and indeed, serious talks began. But the media storm over his possible casting drove the show's ratings up again. Seizing the moment, NBC reversed its decision and brought the show back for a final season, locking Brosnan back into his contract. It was a crushing setback. With Brosnan unavailable, the Bond producers moved forward and cast Timothy Dalton instead. Brosnan had been so close that scripts had already been tailored with him in mind. But timing, that unpredictable force in every actor's life, had worked against him. Still, the story didn't end there. Brosnan's missed opportunity only built more anticipation. The Bond universe had taken note and hadn't forgotten. By the time the 1990s rolled around, the franchise was ready for a revival. And Brosnan, now seasoned and still effortlessly charismatic, was finally free. In 1995, he stepped into the tuxedo in GoldenEye, launching a new era of Bond films and proving that while fate may delay destiny, it doesn't always deny it. But what scars from Brosnan's early years forged the quiet strength that carried him to Bond at last? Stay with us as we rewind the clock. The untold rise of Pierce Brosnan. He was born on May 16, 1953 in Drogheda, Ireland. But from the very start, life gave him no gentle welcome. Pierce Brosnan didn't grow up in privilege or security. There was no silver spoon, no famous name, and not even the comforting presence of a father. His dad, Thomas, disappeared so early from his life that Pierce wouldn't even recognize him in a crowd. Not his voice, not his scent, nothing. Just a blank space where a father should have been. His mother, May, did what many women of that time had to. She carried on. A nurse by profession, she worked tirelessly to make ends meet. But by 1957, with little support and fewer options, she made an agonizing decision to leave for London in search of better work, leaving her 4-year-old son behind in Ireland. What was supposed to be temporary became a 7-year separation. 7 years of growing up passed from hand to hand. First his grandparents, then various relatives, each move uprooting him further, each home a reminder that he belonged nowhere. He learned to stay quiet, to listen more than speak. Classmates knew him as the boy who stared out the window. He wasn't in trouble. He wasn't loud. He was simply absent, like he was living on the outside of his own story. Then, at age 11, everything shifted again. His mother, now remarried, sent for him. Pierce arrived in Scotland, where he met his new stepfather, William Carmichael, a kind, steady man who worked in a factory. For a boy who had known only uncertainty, William's quiet presence was both strange and comforting. He didn't force affection. He simply offered stability, taught him how to fish, how to fix broken things, how to trust slowly. And then one evening, everything changed. William took him to the cinema. The year was 1964. The film Goldfinger. There, on that glowing screen, Sean Connery, as James Bond, burned into young Pierce's imagination. Bond wasn't just a character. He was a symbol of everything Pierce had been denied: power, control, confidence. For the first time, Brosnan saw not just who he was, but who he could become. By 16, his dream wasn't acting, it was painting. He enrolled at St. Martin's School of Art in London, hungry to express himself through color and canvas. He loved the rawness of Lucian Freud, the emotional turmoil of Francis Bacon. He lived poor, surviving on toast and tea, surrounded by classmates with rich backgrounds, but he didn't complain. His work was his voice. Then, one afternoon, while wandering South London in 1971, he stumbled upon a fire eater rehearsing his act. Curious, Pierce asked if he could try. That moment, a flicker of daring, of spontaneity, lit a fuse that would change everything. He was invited to join the local theater workshop. He'd never acted before, but suddenly he didn't need paint to tell his story. Soon after, he auditioned for the Drama Centre London. The training was ruthless. From 1973 to 1976, he pushed himself harder than he ever had. Over half of the students dropped out. Some had breakdowns. The instructors didn't care about comfort, they wanted truth. Pierce studied mime, Shakespeare, and even circus arts. He worked part-time to afford tuition because quitting simply wasn't an option. He took the blows, adapted, and survived. Then came the stage. His first major role came in 1976 in Wait Until Dark, where he played a disturbing character that left audiences unsettled. It was a breakthrough. A year later, he starred in Tennessee Williams's troubled but deeply emotional play, The Red Devil Battery Sign. While the play had failed in the US, Brosnan's London performance earned critical praise. People were finally taking notice. Film work followed, slowly but steadily. In 1980, he appeared briefly in The Mirror Cracked with Elizabeth Taylor. 30 seconds on screen, 50 pounds in his pocket, but it was something. That same year, he played a small IRA role in The Long Good Friday with Bob Hoskins and Helen Mirren. The film would later become a cult classic, and Brosnan, quiet, sharp, magnetic, left a lasting impression. He wasn't an overnight star. He was something rarer. A man who built his career brick by brick, each performance layered with personal history, each role shaped by the years of silence, displacement, and longing. And now, decades later, as the world knows him for his poise, presence, and unmistakable Bond charisma, Brosnan faces a different kind of battle. His wife, Keely Shea Smith, the woman who brought him peace after a life of storms, is facing a grave illness. It's a painful echo of the past. Pierce lost his first wife, Cassandra Harris, to ovarian cancer in 1991. He later lost his daughter, Charlotte, to the same disease. This new chapter is not one he asked for. But if his past has shown us anything, it's that Pierce Brosnan is no stranger to heartbreak, and no stranger to holding on when the world tries to tear him apart. But years before he ever wore the tuxedo, one unexpected twist nearly stole Bond from his reach and changed the franchise's future. Keep watching Brosnan, Dalton, and the battle for Bond. Even as the spotlight shone brightly on Remington Steele, Pierce Brosnan quietly watched a different role slipping through his fingers, the one he had almost grasped but couldn't claim: James Bond. And the man who stepped into 007's shoes instead? His own friend, Timothy Dalton. Dalton, classically trained and known mostly for his stage work, wasn't new to Bond's orbit. He'd been eyed for the part as far back as the early 1970s, before Roger Moore took over. But back then, Dalton felt too young to carry the weight of the franchise. When Moore finally stepped down after A View to a Kill, Dalton returned to the conversation, and in 1987, he became the new face of Bond in The Living Daylights. The producers wanted change. Bond had become too slick, too flashy. They craved grit, something closer to the raw edges of Ian Fleming's novels. Dalton gave them just that, an agent less polished, more dangerous, and unmistakably serious. The strategy seemed to work. At first, The Living Daylights pulled in strong numbers, even outpacing Moore's final outings. But the follow-up, License to Kill, released in 1989, didn't land as expected, at least not in the US. It embraced a darker, more violent tone and tackled harmful substances cartels instead of world domination. It felt too different, too bold, too soon. And while the film did reasonably well globally, the American box office cooled, earning just $34 million. For Dalton, the setback was more than numbers. It left the franchise in limbo, and in that limbo, Brosnan waited. Between 1986 and 1994, often called the lost years of Bond, Brosnan didn't sit idle. He built a body of work that quietly echoed what he could have brought to 007. In The Fourth Protocol, he played a slick British agent caught in a Cold War crisis. In Nomads, he shifted gears into the supernatural, showing his versatility. Even his commercials, like his suave appearance in a Diet Coke ad, were deliberate nods to the Bond aesthetic, as if reminding audiences he hadn't gone anywhere. Meanwhile, plans for Dalton's third Bond film, rumored to be titled Property of a Lady, were already in motion. The storyline would have pushed Bond into a high-tech global conflict, involving a Chinese villain using robotic weapons and computer viruses to threaten nuclear chaos. Bond was even meant to team up with a mysterious cat burglar, a sleek, modern twist. But the film never made it to cameras. A legal feud between MGM, United Artists, and Eon Productions dragged on for years. By the time the dust settled, Dalton's contract had quietly expired. When asked to return, he politely declined, simply saying he no longer wanted it. For Brosnan, this was the second time fate had opened a door, only to slam it shut. But he remained patient, knowing that sometimes the role of a lifetime comes back around, if you're still ready when it does. The love that shaped Bond. But behind all the screen tests and studio politics, there was one person whose belief in Pierce Brosnan never wavered: Cassandra Harris. They met in the late 1970s when Cassandra was already a working actress with a complicated past. Born Sandra Colleen Waits in Sydney in 1948, she'd survived a tough marriage and had 2 young children, Charlotte and Christopher, when Pierce walked into her life. What started as a spark quickly turned into something lasting. By 1980, they were living together in Wimbledon, and on December 27th of that year, they tied the knot. Pierce never planned on becoming a father so young, but when Cassandra's ex-husband passed away in 1986, he adopted her children without hesitation. It wasn't about duty, it was personal. He knew what it meant to grow up without a father, and he was determined that Charlotte and Christopher would never feel that absence. Then came their son, Sean, born in 1983. Suddenly, they were a family of 5. Their home was full of laughter, love, and the kind of stability Pierce had only dreamed of as a boy. Amid all this, something remarkable happened. In 1981, Cassandra was cast as a Bond girl in For Your Eyes Only. While she filmed scenes opposite Roger Moore, her presence on that set led to a chance encounter. Pierce met producer Albert R. Broccoli. Cassandra, ever the believer, whispered her hopes to him. She saw Pierce as Bond long before anyone else did. Broccoli agreed, but there was a catch. Pierce was already committed to Remington Steele, and that contract would block him from slipping into the tuxedo, at least for now. Cassandra never got to see him become Bond, but it was her unwavering faith, her quiet push, and the home they built together that gave Pierce the strength to carry on. In many ways, she gave him his greatest role, not just as 007, but as a father, a husband, and a man who understood what it meant to fight for love. But what silent storm crept in just as their happiness felt secure, threatening to unravel it all? Keep watching to find out. The fight, they never asked for it. It started with a simple feeling. Cassandra seemed tired, not just the kind of tired that fades with rest, but something deeper. They were in India at the time, where Pierce was filming The Deceivers. She hadn't complained much, but her strength wasn't the same. So they returned to London, hoping it was something minor. It wasn't. The news came hard and fast. Ovarian cancer. Not early, not easy. It was already everywhere. The kind of diagnosis that steals the breath from a room. From that moment, late life became a war zone. Cassandra faced 8 operations, round after round of chemotherapy, a year and a half of poison running through her veins. Her hair disappeared, her body withered, but she held on to something stronger than flesh. She refused to surrender control, questioning every decision, challenging doctors and refusing to let fear dictate her story. She chose her path through the pain. Pierce, always near, described himself as the quiet party. Not the hero, not the healer, just a constant presence, doing what he could, even when that was simply sitting beside her in silence. And their son Sean, just a child, tried to make sense of it all. He'd dress up as a little doctor sometimes, trying to fix what he couldn't understand. The weight grew heavier when they realized this wasn't just Cassandra's fight. Her mother had died of the same disease. Now it was clear. This was genetic. The fear extended to Charlotte, their daughter, and it never left Pierce. It transformed him. He didn't want sympathy. He wanted change. He began speaking up, pushing for early detection and better awareness. Then came December 1991. Cassandra chose how she would go. No hospital beeps, no fluorescent lights, just peace. One night, knowing the end was close, she turned to Pierce and whispered, "Please, darling, don't worry. It's just a life winding down." On December 28, 1991, surrounded by love and grief, she slipped away. While others celebrated the season, Pierce sat quietly, holding his son, trying to explain the one thing he could barely accept: the pain of losing Cassandra. The moment his phone rang, everything he thought was solid began to slip away, and in just 47 seconds, Pierce Brosnan's world changed again. But this time, no one was dying. They were simply done with him. Long before he donned the iconic tuxedo and became James Bond, Brosnan had already endured something far more devastating than villains or high-stakes espionage. When his wife, Cassandra Harris, died of cancer, everything came to a halt. The woman who had believed in him when he was still fighting for screen time, the woman who once portrayed a Bond girl herself, was suddenly gone. She had encouraged him to audition again for 007, even as her own time was running out, hoping she'd live long enough to see him step into the role. He later stated that she never truly left him. She became a part of his very being, woven into his every breath. Cassandra's death left him to raise 3 children alone: Sean, still a boy at 8, Charlotte, and Christopher, already on the cusp of adulthood. But nothing prepared him for the hollow weight of grief. It carved deeply into him, yet he kept moving forward. She had given him more than love. She had given him purpose. So when he was finally cast as Bond in 1994, it wasn't just a role. It was a promise fulfilled, soaked in both triumph and sorrow. The studio was hanging by a thread. MGM was circling bankruptcy, and the Bond franchise was gasping for air. Directors had been cycling in and out, and the budget had already ballooned beyond expectations. The pressure was unbearable. If GoldenEye flopped, Bond would perish with it. Instead, it soared. GoldenEye earned over $300 million globally. A tank rumbling through the streets of St. Petersburg cost $8 million alone, and Pierce performed nearly all of his own stunts, including a heart-stopping bungee jump off a 220-meter dam in Switzerland so perilous, insurance companies refused to cover it. It was reckless, it was bold, and it was precisely what Bond needed. The film's success wasn't just cinematic. It became a cultural reset. Nintendo's GoldenEye 007 video game introduced Bond to an entirely new generation. Brosnan wasn't simply portraying Bond, he was saving him. But beneath the action-packed glamour was a man still mourning. When Tomorrow Never Dies hit theaters in 1997, he was still grieving Cassandra 6 years on. He channeled his pain into every scene. In The World Is Not Enough in 1999, Bond faced a new kind of villain, a woman. The film's opening sequence ran 14 minutes, the longest in franchise history, and included a real oil pipeline explosion using 120 gallons of petrol. Brosnan gave it everything. By Die Another Day in 2002, James Bond's 40th anniversary film, he nearly drowned during a botched paragliding stunt that left him underwater in the freezing Icelandic surf. He was hospitalized with hypothermia, but continued filming. The spectacle was enormous. A $300,000 invisible Aston Martin, an ice palace constructed with 1,000 tons of real ice, and yet his performance managed to remain the focus. That same year, he won the Saturn Award for Best Actor, even besting Sean Connery, his own childhood hero. Spielberg called, offering him Indiana Jones. Brosnan declined. Bond came first. He had become the face of a revived empire. Over 4 films, his Bond movies grossed $1.4 billion. He was fit, committed, and already pitching ideas for Bond 21. Then, one afternoon in the Bahamas, while filming After the Sunset, the phone call came. No warning, no build-up. Just, "You were a great James Bond. Thank you very much. Goodbye." The blow wasn't merely professional, it was personal. Studios withdrew their support. His fee plummeted from $12 million to $3 million. He let go of 12 staff members. Emails later revealed that producers had been quietly auditioning other actors behind his back for 2 years. It wasn't simply rejection, it was betrayal. And when the Casino Royale trailer aired, featuring Daniel Craig in the role Brosnan had embodied with such pain and passion, his children saw him cry. Not for losing Bond, but for how little it seemed to matter to those who had taken it from him. They had waited until he was alone to end it, but he wasn't broken. Behind the heartbreak was a man who had carried the franchise back from the brink, who had loved deeply, lost profoundly, and still stood tall, bonded not by fame, but by the memory of a promise kept. When the curtain falls twice, they met on a beach in Cabo San Lucas, just after sunset. It was April 8th, and while the music pulsed through a party crowd, Pierce Brosnan found calm in a quiet corner, talking with Keely Shea Smith, a journalist who wasn't dazzled by his fame. She didn't fall for the Hollywood version of him, she liked the man beneath it all. By 2 a.m. they were still deep in conversation. Within weeks, he flew her to meet his children. 6 months later, she moved in. Years would pass, and that connection, quiet and true, would become the only thing keeping him from falling apart, because the past never stayed buried. In 1991, he had watched his wife, Cassandra Harris, slowly fade away from ovarian cancer. She was just 43. It was brutal. 8 surgeries, 18 months of chemo. He called it life-changing. Everything changes when you're dealing with death, he said. She was the love of his life. Losing her was like losing part of himself. Then, 2 decades later, the nightmare returned. Charlotte, the daughter Pierce had adopted and loved as his own, was diagnosed with the same disease that killed her mother and grandmother. She was only 41 when it finally took her. 3 generations of women, stolen by the same silent killer. Ovarian cancer often hides until it's too late. 75% of cases are found in the late stages, when survival rates drop to as low as 20%. Charlotte had fought for 3 long years, and even while dying, she was still thinking of others. On June 14, 2013, she married Alex Smith, her longtime partner. Just 2 weeks later, on June 28th, she passed away in London at 2:00 p.m., surrounded by Alex, her children Isabella and Lucas, and her brothers. She had once said, "This is my family. I want to give them all the love I can." And she did. The echo of history was devastating. Charlotte was 15 when her mother was diagnosed. Her daughter Isabella was the same age when she lost hers. Lucas was 8, the exact age Pierce's son Sean had been when Cassandra died. It was almost too cruel to be a coincidence. Pierce was shattered. Again. At a 2014 cancer fundraiser, his voice cracked as he said, "I held the generous, strong, beautiful hand of my first wife. And just last year, I held the hand of my daughter." It wasn't just grief. It was a cycle repeating, each time sharper, deeper. But through that darkness, Keely remained by his side. The love that began on a beach years before held strong. And though Pierce stepped in as a grieving grandfather trying to comfort broken children, part of him was lost to the past, mourning the women he'd loved and the history he couldn't rewrite. But what quiet storm was brewing with his son Christopher while grief consumed him? Stay glued to your screen to find out. Shadows, scars, and the strength to ease again. Christopher once had a future lined with promise. He worked on Pierce Brosnan's Bond films like Tomorrow Never Dies and The World Is Not Enough, following in his father's footsteps. But after Cassandra died in 1991, grief consumed him. He was just 19, too young to carry so much pain. By 1996, he was fined for drunk driving. A year later, he was jailed for doing it again. Then came the harmful substances nights lost in London. He collapsed outside a club and slipped into a coma. In 2012, at 32, he was arrested again for heroin possession. He had become unrecognizable, tangled in the Brixton harmful substances scene, miles from the bright young man he once was. In June 2024, after 2 decades away from public life, Christopher was seen outside a London grocery store. Gaunt, alone, 51, still standing, still fighting. While Christopher battled his demons, Keely Shea Smith had her own. For years, tabloids mocked her weight. Cruel headlines, side-by-side photos, endless comparisons. But Pierce refused to let it stand. In a now famous post, he wrote, "I love every curve of her body. She gave me our children." That love grounded her. By 2024, Keely, now 61, had lost 100 pounds. Without surgery, just walking, swimming, and nourishing her body with patience and self-respect. "This body gave me life," she wrote. "I finally honored it." In August 2024, she and Pierce celebrated 23 years of marriage. 31 years since they first met through tragedy. Still strong, still in love. At their anniversary, Pierce called her his north, south, east, and west. She replied, "You are the finest, loveliest, tenderest person I have ever known." They reappeared in April 2025, attending George Clooney's Broadway debut. Her in lace, him still graceful. At 71, Pierce remains sharp, cast as Dr. Fate in Black Adam in 2022. But his strength runs deeper. A longtime UNICEF ambassador, Greenpeace supporter, and cancer awareness advocate, he once boycotted a film premiere to protest nuclear testing. He couldn't save Charlotte, but in speaking out, in showing up, in loving fiercely, he's still trying to save others. But what do you think gave Pierce Brosnan the strength to carry on after losing his first wife, then his daughter, and nearly losing his son to addiction? We'd love to hear your thoughts, so be sure to like, comment, and subscribe.